Hello, class. I hope you enjoyed your previous lesson on the Salamanders, a noble alliance of reptilian beings who may one day lead the forces of good in a fiery victory. For today's lesson, we will speak of a people who had suffered a great tragedy, but hoped to one day rise from the ashes and take back what was so brutally taken from them. For today's lesson, we will speak of the free dwarves. As you recall from your previous lesson on the dwarves of the northern holds within the Halpi Mountains had refused to join with their southern kin in the war with Winter, a decision that, by the end of the war, had caused a rift between north and south that had divided them as a people. The free clans, as the northern dwarves now called their holds, declared that they would never be beholden to any king, lord, or power to ever rise from the southern holds. And over the centuries, as weak kings ruled the fractured southern dwarves, the continued prosperity of the northern dwarves showed that such a declaration was perhaps the right one. The free clan slowly reconquering holds lost during the war with Winter, and bringing them back to prominence and prestige. But it was more than wealth and status that changed for the free dwarves, but also culture, iconography, and battle philosophy. For although dwarves by nature are slow to change, now that they were separated from their southern kin, the northern holds soon had their own distinct identity. The house colors of various holds changed from the commonly used shades of red, brown, and gold to greens, blues, and even white, acknowledging the free dwarves' unusual preference for traveling the lands above, instead of sequestering themselves in their underground holds. Many holds even became famous for the skills of their rangers, an occupation that was usually considered by their southern kin as useful and even necessary, but rather undwarf-like. The look of their armies changed as well, the warriors of the free dwarves moving away from the iron-banded hammerhead helmets and square or heater shield designs of their southern kin, for helms with curved horns, and shields with round or oval designs. The preference for less angular shapes in their designs perhaps showcasing their willingness to accept much more inventive thinking, such as their views on technology. With relations between North and South being so poor, warsmiths rarely traveled between them, and thus the secrets of various warsmith chambers became exclusive to either the northern or southern dwarves. Not to mention disgraced warsmiths, who for whatever reason were exiled from their southern holds, and were welcomed with open arms in the north and allowed to experiment. One example of this experimentation is the Jarun Bombard, produced by the dangerously inventive, at least by dwarven standards, Jarun Ironmonger. It was a war machine that could be fired like a cannon, or indirectly like a mortar. Considered a dangerous weapon by more traditional warsmiths, it had found much use in many northern and southern armies. Despite the tensions between North and South, there was one place where all dwarves, no matter their allegiances, could meet without violence: Collock Moore, a rocky outcrop topped with bleak hard trees that jut up from the very center of an area known as the Great Cataract, a massive chasm through which a mighty waterfall pours water into the depths below. Collock Moore could only be reached by the chainway, a feat of dwarven ingenuity that joined north and south by use of a massive chain attached to each side of the chasm. Using this chain, ferries could be pulled across to travel to this outcrop, or even the lands of their kin beyond, although most dwarves were not inclined to do the latter. This sacred place was held by the Thistledew clan, a neutral clan who by ancient compact held power there, and could mediate between both sides, and it was here where matters of state were hashed out, or dwarven families could reunite briefly with estranged relatives. This state of affairs continued until the coming of Golock, the ambitious dwarf who through strength of arm and deviousness of mind, took control of all the southern holds and made himself king. And as many dwarven refugees fled north to escape his rule, tales of his ambition and ruthlessness made the free dwarves worried. They knew that eventually, Golock would set his eyes to the north, and the southern dwarves, now known as Imperial Dwarves, would fight to make Golock's dream of a mighty dwarven empire a reality. The free dwarves began to prepare themselves for war, even allowing dwarven citizens to join their ranks as spear levies to help bolster their numbers, an idea unthinkable to the imperial dwarves, who were far more traditional in their thinking and didn't like the idea of dwarves acting outside of their societal roles. And over the years, as Golock's power grew, the free dwarves waited for what they viewed as an inevitable attack from the south. But distracted as they were, they didn't notice as another enemy long ignored to their north made their move. Over 10 years ago, abyssal energy surged from the abyss, forming bridges between its layers and allowing abyssal demons to pour out into the world, an abyssal crusade that threatened to bring all of Panathor under the heel of the Wicked Ones. These same energies empowered the twisted beings that resided in Dragar, a hellish land near the abyss, beings known as Abyssal Dwarves. Invigorated by the power of their Wicked One masters, the Abyssal Dwarves set their sights to the south and the lands of the Dwarves, and what they saw excited them to no end. Unlike the Abyssal Dwarves, who were strong and united under the leadership of the powerful and ruthless Overking Xerxes, the dwarves south of their domain were weak and divided, the animosity between Free and Imperial ensuring that neither side would go to the other's aid under any circumstances. It was time to go to war and take what was owed, and to the Abyssal Dwarves, that meant taking everything. Strong slaves were armed while the weak were sacrificed for Wicked One favors. Infernal creations, both biological and mechanical, were crafted and pressed into service, and Abyssal Dwarf warriors were outfitted with newly forged armor, blessed by the tainted magic of iron casters. Once their armies were ready, the Abyssal Dwarves marched south, a march that would not stop until they eliminated every single dwarven hold on Mantic. The free dwarves were completely unprepared for such a massive army, and holds soon began to fall. Despite what seemed like an inevitable defeat, the free dwarves fought on stubbornly, as only dwarves can, and many are the heroic battles that are still talked about today. Darun Ironmonger emptying his workshops and armories, and holding the line with over 100 war machines at Quelgen for 7 days and 7 nights, to allow the host people time to escape. Sevri Igalax, latest in a long line of berserker lords, leading an entire army of other blood-mad survivors as they fought battle after battle, even when there was no hope of victory in sight. Hernius of Crag Galan, a master ranger of legendary skill, who harassed the enemy day in and day out in revenge for his fallen hold. But even with the taking of so many lives, the Abyssal Dwarfs could not be stopped. Their numbers were too great, and their cruelty was even greater. When a hold fell, Abyssal Dwarves would butcher the defenders and raze it, slaughtering anyone they found inside. It was in these times of tragedy that many dwarves succumbed to the Red Curse, and it is why even now, the armies of the Free Dwarves have a substantially higher number of berserkers than their imperial kin. The final battle for the northern lands took place at Ren du Faris, the closest hold to the Great Cataract. But this was no heroic last stand, but a full retreat. The remaining Free Dwarves knew they could not stop the Abyssal assault, and with a heavy heart, chose to flee and seek refuge with their southern kin. A slow process, as the ferries could only hold so many dwarves at a time, which meant that the remaining Free Dwarf defenders would have to hold off the armies of their tainted kin to ensure the refugees could escape to safety. As the Abyssal Dwarf army marched like an iron glacier towards Ren du Faris, ironclads, bulwarkers, and iron guard from a dozen different hosts stood shoulder to shoulder to hold the tide. Behind them, those with rifles and crossbows shot at whatever they could, or joined the melee when their ammunition ran out. And berserkers raged into the thick of battle, hoping to kill as many slaves, mutants, and Abyssal Dwarves as they could before they fell. Eventually, the refugees and many of the defenders escaped to the other side, leaving a heroic few behind to hold the line for as long as they could before they inevitably fell in battle. And it was then when the patriarch of the Thistledew clan, Bane, performed his final duty. Wielding an enchanted axe, he struck the massive chain of the Chain Way, and the ancient bridge that once united two people was shattered forever, an act that all who witnessed it knew was only a temporary reprieve, for the greed of the Abyssal Dwarves would not be stopped so easily. Thankfully, their salvation came from another source. Unknown to the dwarves at the time, the Green Lady and several Neritic and Aqua Mages performed a desperate act to halt the Abyssal Crusade, enacting a grand ritual that pushed the waters of a nearby sea into the abyss, flooding it. An act that not only cut much of the power of the Wicked Ones that was powering the Abyssal Dwarves' magic and machines, but also flooded much of Tragar. In light of these events, the Abyssal Dwarves chose to consolidate their gains, reinforcing the captured former holds of the Free Dwarves, while many of their legions retreated back to their homeland. The survivors were eventually met by an entourage on behalf of Golock. From what I hear, several dwarves in the entourage gave beautiful speeches about how they shared the Free Dwarves' pain, and that the Imperial Dwarves would generously give them their aid. However, the chastising tone in their words was clear. The Free Dwarves could not defend their homes, and were looked down upon because of it. The Imperial Dwarves essentially stating that if they had simply followed Golock's will, they would not have lost their holds. And what better proof of this than the lack of Abyssal Dwarves attempting to attack the south? Obviously, their tainted kin were afraid of the armies of Golock. A false belief, but one the Imperial Dwarves, in their arrogance, believe wholeheartedly. The former clan lords of the Northern Holds knew they could not say no to Golock's aid, and swallowed their pride for their people, and it also helped that they knew how Golock dealt with those who voiced the dissent. Most of the Free Dwarves settled in disused holds north and east of Abukar that were graciously given to them by Golock, and can now only long for the lands and mountains they have lost, many even now planning on ways to retake them. Others chose to live in the various lands of men. For example, in Basileia, the city of Goldenhorn's dwarven district is full to bursting with the survivors of at least 3 free dwarf clans. A few dwarves, however, are far more adventurous. They travel far from Mantica to far-flung continents on the world of Panathor, and those who survive such a journey have been known to eventually call their family allies, bondsdwarfs, warsmiths, artisans, and assorted hanger-ons to them, seeking to establish new holds in remote corners of Panathor that may have never known the strength and skill of the dwarven people. Well, class, I hope you enjoyed this lesson on the Free Dwarves. Although they suffered a great tragedy, I do believe one good thing did come from it: the spreading of the dwarves across the world of Panathor. The usually isolationist beings now bringing their skilled craftsmanship and stubborn resolve to the various nations and peoples of the world, a boon to those who aim to fight the evils of Panathor. Next lesson, we will speak of a brutal people who worship a being who would see all gods, no matter if they be shining or wicked, fall. Next lesson, we will speak of the Varangur.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on the Free Dwarves in the tabletop war game Kings of War. If you like it, please like, subscribe, comment, press the little bell so you know where I post, etc. so that the YouTube guys know I exist, and hopefully more people might see this content then get more into the game. If you really like it though, and only if you really like it, please also consider giving to my Patreon or my Ko-fi account. The extra money gives it a chance to work on these stories I love. Anyway, thanks for listening/watching, and see you next time.